Okay, students, in this video we're going to look at making an object move to a specific point when you step on a trigger. Now, I've called this in a couple places an event trigger because we can use it a bunch of different ways. And it's a lot more robust and has a lot more ways to use it than things like the interp movement component. So I'm going to go to my blueprints folder and I'm going to add a new blueprint here, and I'm going to choose actor. And I'm going to call this, for now I'm just going to call it movement trigger. And later we may make duplicates of it and make changes that we name different things. So I'm going to add a couple things to the components of this blueprint. First, I'm just going to add a static mesh. And that static mesh I'm going to make be the basic cube. I'm going to use a basic shape cube. And then I'm going to add a couple other things. I'm going to add a box collision. And this will be our trigger. And I want to drag it up into the scene root and I hit attach. That way it is not attached to the mesh, because we want the mesh to move around and we don't want it to move everything else with it. And I'm going to rename this, and I'm going to call it like player trigger, because this is what's going to set off the movement. And then I'm going to add a second collision box. And again, I'm going to drag it into the scene root so that it is not a child of any of them. And I'm going to rename this one end location. And this one isn't actually going to trigger anything, but I'm using a collision trigger because they're automatically invisible. I could use literally any object for this, but I quite like it for what it's doing. So we're going to go to the event graph, and we have a number of things we're going to do. I'm going to grab a begin play here, and the first thing I'm going to do is with the static mesh here selected, I'm going to right click, and I'm going to say get world location, because I want its location, and again, of the static mesh. So it's going to bring in a static mesh and a world location here. And we can just right click on this guy here and choose promote to variable, because that's what I want to do. I want to save the world location of the static mesh as its own variable. And I'm going to call this start location. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing with the end location. So I'm going to, once again, get world location of the end location. And then I'm going to turn this guy into a variable. And I'm going to call this guy end location, which I probably shouldn't do because it has the exact same. It's not, see, it probably won't even let me because it's the same as something I already named. So let's call this finish location, which is good. Cool. And we'll put some other stuff here eventually. But what we want is, and we can always edit the location of all these things in our level, but what we want here is to have it be an event collision begin overlap with the player trigger. So when I overlap with the player trigger, what are we going to do? Well, we're going to cast to third person character, which is great, and it makes sure it's the other object. And then we're going to add a new node here that we haven't used before called timeline. Add timeline. And this is timeline 0. Now, we can use the timeline, if I double click on it here, we can use the timeline to quite literally be a timeline where we control where different things and how numbers go through space, and basically set it up as animations and stuff and add keyframes. But we're going to use it super simply. So I'm going to click this button right here to add a float track. And then I'm going to just click on the line twice, right-click on it, and choose Add Key. I'm going to put 2 keyframes on here. And then I'm going to select a keyframe and make this first keyframe 0 on time and 0 on value. And then I'm going to select this keyframe and make it 1 on time and 1 on value. And then I'm going to click at the top here and make the length of our whole timeline 1, which basically just gives us this very clean, linear time. And we're kind of cheating it here, but basically what this means is through time, it is going to go up in the same value as it goes across. Now, we could play with the line here and make it so that it did like a soft in and soft out or all sorts of things, but I'm just going to keep it super linear for now in this instance. So back to our event graph at the top here. When I am in the box, it is going to play the timeline, and the timeline is going to run from 0 to 1. And we have this bit that comes out here that is update. And we want to update, basically as it's moving through the timeline, we are going to update the set world location of the static mesh, so my cube. So as it moves through the timeline, it is going to change the position of the static mesh, and we're going to give it a new position. And this is going to happen every frame as we move through the timeline based on how far we are through the timeline. So we're going to choose this based on a number of different things. So we have here this track, which is the timeline track. And what we want to do is we want to type LERP, which is lerp, and we want the one that says lerp vector. Okay, now lerp, as you can see here as I mouse over it, stands for linear interpolation. Basically what it does is it calculates between point A and point B based on how far along you are in your alpha. So if I had a start location here and an end location here, and the alpha said we were 30% along, it would measure the line between 2 points and figure out where 30% is and find that new point for us. And this can work in 3D space. So what we want here is to drag these variables that we made, our start location, get, and our end location, get, out here and put them in A and B. So what this is saying is it's going to say, we already saved our start location, which is wherever the static mesh was, and our end location, which is wherever this end location box is. And it's going to draw a line between them. And then depending on how far into our timeline we are, which is a straight line from 1 to 0, it is going to calculate a new position to set the static mesh at. And so that goes here into new location. Now, this is likely going to go very fast. So the last thing we do here is we're going to set play rate. And it's not going to show up unless we turn off context sensitive. And it is a thing that we want for timelines. We're going to set a timeline play rate. And so the target here is timeline 0, which you can see is a variable that is created when we made our timeline. So we're going to put that in here. And then the rate we can choose, but I'm going to actually right-click and promote this guy to a variable. And I'm going to rename it like move speed, because that's what it is. It is the move speed that is going to happen of this timeline. Because even though it's 1 second, by default, we're going to speed it up or slow it down. So by default, we should have it be like a 1 as our default value, but we can now change it in the engine if I reveal my little I here to make it public. So now, with this saved, we now have this new movement trigger. So I'm going to move this out here. And remember, this blueprint, if we look at it, has 3 things in it. We have its mesh, and we have the trigger, and we have the end location. So I'm going to move this guy sort of like way off here. And I'm going to move the trigger the thing that I need to step in over here, and I can even scale it so it's a little bigger. And then I'm going to move the end location here. So if we look at this, and I can like reuse this blueprint over and over again. If we look at this, this is over here, and if I step into this box, it's going to fly at me to here and move in between as we go. So let's look and see if this works. So I'm going to clear out some of these coins, but if I step into this space, it comes at me. There it is. Now, because we have this all set up, we can have this be coming through a wall or be coming through whatever, because it doesn't have collision, it doesn't have things going on, it's just moving directly to it. So I can, again, with this blueprint I've made, use this a million different ways. This could be a door that when I step into the space, the door sinks into the ground. This could be a ghost flying at me. This could be whatever. So like I could take this static mesh and change it into something else. You know, this could be falling rocks. This could be whatever. So here I'm going to change it into being a door. So I just changed the static mesh. It's still the same blueprint. And I'm going to set it here. And I'm going to take its end location and move it sort of straight down from it through the floor here. And so now I have this evil door. And if I walk up to it, it sinks into the floor. And if we want it to go slower, I can use this move speed here and set this at like 0.2 and hit play. And now I can step up to it and it will slowly sink into the floor or raise, whatever you want it to do. And you can, of course, combine this with previous things we've learned. If we look at our original key and door, you could make a key be required in here. You can also add a sound effect in here as it's updating. You could also set a variable that changes when it's finished and allows you to play it in reverse, which will basically update it in the reverse of this and move it back up. And of course, we can use this for our jump scare. So what I could do here is I'm going to delete this guy, and I'm going to duplicate my movement trigger and call this one ghost trigger. Not quite 2 T's in ghost trigger. And I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to take my static mesh, and I'm going to add a skeletal mesh here. And this one I do actually want to be a child of this. And I have this cool demon skull that I found on Sketchfab. And it even comes with an animation. I'm going to use an animation asset. If we look in my viewport, we can see this spooky skull. I'm going to make him just a smidge smaller. And, of course, what I can do here is leave all my code alone and just turn the visibility of my cube off. And hit compile. And now with my ghost trigger, I can pull this guy in here. Let me rotate him around. And what I can do here is I can take the static mesh here and move it off. And notice, of course, the skeletal mesh is moving with it because it is parented. And then I have the player trigger in the right spot, and the end location is also in the right spot. I want it to come right at me. And let's look at our default and come in here, and we should have in this blueprint the move speed, and I'm going to set it at like 4, so it comes at me 4 times faster. And if we look here, if we had a wall here, and let's even just do that. I can put a quick wall here so that I can't see the ghost as it's on the other side. Something like that. I don't see it coming, and I over here and I walk into the space, and it just pops out of the wall at me. And you can obviously imagine if it had sound, it would be quite spooky and would make you jump. It could also come at me without the wall, and we'll see it coming at a distance, and it's like, oh god, what did I do? Obviously a loud scream or something like that would help make the scare even more direct. And you can quite easily have it so that it disappears when it hits a certain point by just adding into this blueprint, right? We could have it so that when it's finished, it teleports back to original location, right? So right now we have it set world location updated. I could copy this and have it so that when it finishes, it's going to go back to its start location. So it'll get to us. Maybe we'll put a quick delay in here, just a really short one, so that it pauses for a second and then it just disappears and you don't know what happened. There's lots of ways you can add to this, learning what we know and what we've used in blueprints so far. So here I have this guy and he flies at me and then he disappears. And if I had a wall there, we wouldn't know sort of like where he went or what was up. Lots of different ways to use this timeline trick to update quite a bit of things.